Level 1. I just downloaded this game. Everyone starts here, the beginner stage. The part of Clash Royale where your deck makes no sense but you feel unstoppable. You just finished the tutorial and you're ready to conquer the arenas. You pick a giant because it looks strong, you throw minions because it flies, and you add a musketeer just to make it balanced. You look at your deck and think, this is perfect, then you go into your first match and get crushed in 2 minutes. That is what level 1 decks are all about, chaos. You're still figuring things out, you pick cards based on what looks powerful, not what actually works together. You'll see a lot of decks filled with heavy cards that cost too much elixir and take forever to play. Sometimes you even have 3 or 4 cards that do the same thing and nothing to defend your tower. It's normal though, everyone goes through this stage. At this level, your card collection is small, you use what the game gives you, and try your best. A common beginner deck has Giant, Musketeer, Archers, Mini P.E.K.K.A, and Fireball. It's not the best, but it teaches you a lot. You learn how to build a push, how to defend, and how to use spells. Most of the time you'll lose because you spent all your elixir attacking, then your opponent rushes the other lane, and your tower is gone before your giant even crosses the bridge. Level 1 decks also teach you how important timing and placement are. You start to see how one badly placed card can ruin everything. You'll drop your Mini P.E.K.K.A in the wrong lane, and it'll fly off doing nothing while your tower gets destroyed. You'll waste a fireball on one troop and wish you waited a second longer. These small mistakes hurt, but they make you better. Another thing about level 1 decks is that they show you what kind of player you are. Some people love rushing and spamming cards the moment they get elixir. Others like saving up for one big push. This stage helps you find your style. You might notice that you like fast cards like Battle Ram or prefer slow, heavy cards like Giant. That's how you start to build your identity in the game. If you check early Clash Royale discussions, you'll see players posting their first decks proudly, saying things like, I think this deck is unbeatable. You'll see someone using Barbarians, Valkyrie, and P.E.K.K.A in one lineup, and somehow they win a few games because low arenas are unpredictable. Everyone experiments here, and that's what makes it fun. Even though these decks look random, they have a purpose. They teach you the basics of Clash Royale, how to defend before attacking, and how to use your tower as part of your defense. You begin to notice how certain cards counter others and how a single smart play can change the game. Every win feels earned, and every loss teaches you something new. The best part about this level is the progress you start to feel. At first you're dropping cards everywhere, but after a few matches you start waiting for the right moment. You stop panicking when you see a push coming your way. You begin to defend properly, then use that defense to launch your own attack. Slowly, your random deck starts to make sense. Eventually, you unlock new cards, and things begin to change. You replace weaker ones with better options. You start to understand which cards work well together. You stop picking based on looks and start thinking about balance. That's when you move from pure chaos to something that feels like a real strategy. So yes, level 1 decks are rough, they are unbalanced and unpredictable, but they are also the foundation of everything that comes next. Every pro player once started here. They all had messy decks and embarrassing losses. What mattered was that they kept learning. Level 2, I kinda know what I'm doing. This is the stage where things finally start to make sense. You've played enough games to know that spamming every card you own is not a real strategy. You've figured out how elixir works, and you can tell when your opponent is running low. You've also started to realize that defense actually wins games. You're already sitting at 2,000 trophies is where your decks begin to look a little smarter, but there's still plenty of chaos hiding underneath. At this point, you've unlocked more cards and your choices have expanded. You begin testing new combinations and removing the ones that obviously don't work. Maybe you replace archers with minions for better air control, or swap knight for Valkyrie because she handles ground swarms better. You're not just throwing cards together anymore, you're building around an idea. You've started to think in terms of a win condition. A deck when you're already sitting at 2,000 trophies usually has one main card that carries the match. It could be Prince, Hog Rider, or Balloon. The rest of the deck exists to support that card. You now understand that your goal isn't to play every troop as soon as you get elixir, but to create pushes that make sense. When you drop a Prince, you follow it up with support troops. When you play a Hog Rider, you make sure you have enough to defend right after. It's no longer random, it's planned. But even with all that progress, mistakes still happen. You sometimes overdefend and end up wasting elixir. You still panic when an enemy rushes your other lane. And sometimes you forget to count how much elixir you've used and run out at the worst possible moment. Decks at this stage are better, but they still rely a bit on luck and reaction instead of full control. The thing about this stage is that it feels exciting. You're finally seeing improvement. You can beat players you couldn't before. You know how to counter simple pushes, you've learned that not every card should be dropped behind your king tower, and that sometimes it's smarter to defend near the bridge. You've started predicting your opponent's moves and using that to your advantage. That feeling of wait, I actually know what I'm doing, kicks in, and it's addictive. In this level, you also start recognizing card synergy. You now understand that pairing Valkyrie with Musketeer makes a stronger push because one handles ground while the other handles air. You see why players use spells like Fireball or arrows at specific times. You stop wasting spells and start using them to create value. You even begin experimenting with cheap cycle decks, trying to use fast cards like Skeletonins or Bomber to keep your rhythm going. This is also where you start learning how to deal with real pressure. Your opponents are still learning, but they're getting smarter. So every bad play gets punished and every mistake teaches you a new lesson. You start thinking ahead instead of reacting. You prepare your defenses before your opponent even attacks. Even though you're still far from mastering the game, your matches start lasting longer because you're not getting steamrolled anymore. You start holding draws or winning by small margins. You notice that tower health doesn't matter as much as control does. You're beginning to understand that Clash Royale is a game of patience, not just power. One common thing about players in this level is the excitement to try everything new. You unlock cards and instantly want to rebuild your deck from scratch. Sometimes it works, other times it backfires badly. But through all that you're learning, you're slowly building a sense of what makes a deck balanced. You start asking questions like, do I have enough defense or is my deck too expensive? Things that never crossed your mind before. By the time you're done with this level, you've stopped seeing Clash Royale as a game of luck. You now see it as a game of planning. You know that timing and decision making are the real difference between winning and losing. And that's what separates level 2 from level 1 player, the awareness that skill actually matters. So level 2 decks might not be perfect, but they're the first real step into understanding how Clash Royale works. You're not just playing anymore, you're learning how to think like a player. Level 3, the meta copycat decks. This is the level where players start getting serious, or at least they think they are. You've moved past random deck building and now you're copying the decks you see winning on YouTube and Reddit. You've watched a few pro or YouTuber matches and thought, if it worked for them, it'll work for me. So you grab that Hog Cycle deck or the Giant Double Prince setup and take it straight into ladder matches, convinced this is the secret to victory. By this point, your decks are usually clean, structured, and undeniably meta. They have win conditions that make sense and support troops that balance each other perfectly. Every card has a purpose and nothing feels random anymore. You can tell that some thought went into it, even if it wasn't your own. These decks are reliable, efficient, and in the right hands, deadly. The problem is, you're still learning to use those hands. You've learned the basic theory, but not the deeper rhythm. You know what cards to use in certain situations, but the when and why are still developing. You might drop a Hog Rider too early before clearing their defenses, or place a Baby Dragon a little too far back and lose the timing of your push. This level is all about imitation, and while imitation is progress, it's not mastery. You're following patterns from the pros, but you haven't developed your own instincts yet. At this stage, players start obsessing over balance changes. One card gets nerfed and everyone panics. You switch decks more often than you actually play them. You might spend more time scrolling through deck lists than battling. Still, even with all that uncertainty, this is where most players experience their biggest jump in performance. You start winning more consistently because you're finally using strategies that actually work. Your defenses are getting smarter too. You're learning basic concepts like using buildings to redirect troops and knowing which units survive certain spells. You've stopped wasting elixir mindlessly and started thinking about elixir advantage. You're beginning to understand tempo and pressure, even if you can't execute it perfectly every time. What makes this stage interesting is the false confidence that comes with it. Because these decks are tested and proven, you start thinking you've figured the game out. You begin giving advice to your friends like you're a mini coach. But when things go wrong, you realize there's still a huge difference between using a meta deck and actually playing it well. That's when you start noticing how small mistakes can ruin a match. You also start picking sides. Maybe you become a cycle deck lover or a beatdown main. You find your comfort zone and start defending it like your life depends on it. It's the phase where you begin to form your identity as a player. You're not just testing decks anymore. You're experimenting with small variations, swapping a card here and there to fit your style. You begin to understand that the best deck is the one that feels natural in your hands. This is also the level where you start noticing opponent patterns. You recognize when someone always plays Giant in the back or when they're getting low on elixir. You're not just reacting blindly anymore. You're starting to think one step ahead, even if you don't always act on it correctly. But this is also where you hit a wall. Meta decks get you far, but they don't teach you everything. You know the deck works, but when your opponent does something unexpected or plays off meta, you might freeze up. You're executing someone else's strategy well, but it's not truly yours yet. You haven't learned to improvise when the script breaks. Level 4, the Control Freak decks. This is the stage where players finally stop winging it and start playing with purpose. You've left behind the chaos of random pushes and the copy-paste decks from before. Now you actually care about how every card works together. You become that player who hates losing control of a match. Every decision matters, and every move is planned, and you're always keeping track of elixir in your head. You're officially a control freak. Control freak decks aren't about being flashy. They don't rely on massive beatdown pushes or surprise wins. They're about keeping your opponent exactly where you want them. These decks are usually built to defend well and punish mistakes fast. You might be using Minor Control, Mortar Cycle, or even Graveyard. It doesn't really matter because the focus is always the same. Control the tempo of the game. At this level, you've learned to be patient. You're not rushing attacks or overcommitting just because you see an open lane. You wait, you defend cleanly, build elixir, and only push when it makes sense. You're the type of player who actually enjoys shutting down an enemy push with just 3 cards. You start grinning when your opponent wastes a big spell because you know you just won the elixir trade. You've also started understanding timing better. You know when to place your building to pull a giant or how to spread your troops to avoid giving fireball value. You know exactly when to use log or tornado for maximum effect. Every move has a reason. You're not just reacting anymore, you're thinking ahead. It's like you're playing a different game than your opponent. This level is where control really clicks. You can slow down a game whenever you want or speed it up just to mess with your opponent's rhythm. You've learned how to cycle fast and keep pressure while still defending. You're not counting on one lucky push anymore. You're winning through consistency and patience, but being a control freak has its problems too. You start overthinking stuff. Sometimes you hesitate because you want everything to be perfect. You might defend too much and forget to actually pressure your opponent. Control decks work best when you're stable, but that same need for stability can make you play too cautiously. Still, at least now, you're not losing from dumb mistakes, you're learning from being too careful. Players at this stage also care way more about efficiency. You start noticing how much value you get from every card. You'll hold a spell until you can hit multiple troops with it. You'll wait to drop your tank killer at the perfect moment. You've got discipline now, and it shows in how clean your defenses are. Watching someone at this level handle a full push with half the elixir is honestly pretty satisfying. This level also changes how you see elixir. It's not just something that fills up automatically, it's everything. You count it, you track your opponent's elixir, you know when they're low, and that's when you attack. You've stopped making emotional plays and started making smart ones. By now, you're tough to beat because you don't repeat mistakes. You're thinking about positioning, perfecting your timing, and studying your matches. You can tell when someone's panicking just by watching how they play, and that's when you really take over. Control decks aren't loud or dramatic, they don't rely on crazy combos or insane plays. They win quietly and steadily. They're frustrating to play against because no matter what the opponent tries, you're always ready for it. And this is where skill really starts separating casual players from serious ones. You've learned the value of control, the power of timing, and the patience to wait for your moment. You're not chasing big flashy wins anymore, you're just winning consistently. By the end of this stage, you've become the player who doesn't need luck or gimmicks. You just need time. And that's what makes control decks so strong. Level 5. The Strategist decks. This is where players officially leave the comfort zone and enter full mastery mode. You've stopped playing Clash Royale just to win matches, now you play to outthink people. Every move is part of a plan. Every card placement, every prediction, every elixir trade has meaning. You've evolved from controlling the game to completely shaping it around your rhythm. Level 5 decks belong to strategists. These are the players who don't rely on surprise or luck. They rely on structure. They know how to turn defense into offense and how to create value from nothing. The decks here are refined versions of everything you've learned so far. You understand win conditions, cycle patterns, counter interactions, and spell timing like second nature. You're not reacting to what's happening, you're setting traps for it. At this level, you start predicting things with scary accuracy. You know when your opponent is about to drop a certain card, and you already have your counter in hand. You're not just responding, you're anticipating. Your entire gameplay feels smoother because you finally see the bigger picture. You're not playing one move at a time anymore, you're playing sequences. Strategist decks often focus on balance. You've built something that works in every situation, not just specific matchups. You know how to adjust mid-game and shift your win condition when needed. If your main strategy isn't working, you adapt. Maybe your Hog Rider keeps getting stopped before reaching the tower, so you switch to chip damage with spells. If your giant pushes keep getting countered, you bait out their building first. Every move has intention behind it. The big shift at this level is your brain's finally doing the math. You're checking elixir, tower damage, and what cards they've used all at the same time without your head exploding. You're actually looking at both arenas now instead of tunnel visioning on your own panic. Everything feels faster and cleaner because you've stopped overthinking every single move. You're playing from experience and logic now, not just throwing stuff out there and crossing your fingers. You've also learned when not to play. That's something most players never master. Sometimes the best move is to wait, and you've become comfortable with that. You know when to reset the game's pace and when to apply pressure. That control over tempo is what makes strategists dangerous. You don't just play your cards, you play your opponent's patience. Another thing that defines level 5 decks is adaptability. You can handle different deck styles now because you're starting to understand how they work. Control, beatdown, cycle, you're not a master at all of them, but you can play them decently because your basics are solid. New metas and balance changes don't freak you out like they used to because you're getting better at adapting. You've built up some real game sense, and it helps you stay competitive even when things change. Your losses have evolved too. When you lose now, it's not from being completely lost, it's from calculated moves that backfired or errors you can pinpoint. You're learning to break down what happened and think about the next match. You're building that analytical mindset. Sure, losing still sucks and you still get tilted sometimes, but you're trying to learn from it instead of just spam emoting and closing the game. This is also where your creativity starts to show. You experiment not to copy, but to innovate. You tweak one or two cards to surprise your opponents while keeping your deck's core intact. You start building hybrid decks that merge different archetypes. You find little tricks that others overlook, and that gives you an edge. Players at this stage treat Clash Royale more like a thinking game. You're spotting patterns, reading opponents better, and adapting quicker than you used to. You've improved a lot at keeping your cool when matches get intense, and you're learning to always have a plan B ready. These decks aren't about steamrolling people, they're about being smarter. You win more often because you've learned things your opponents haven't figured out yet. At this point, the game feels less chaotic and more manageable because you're starting to understand what's actually happening. This is the stage where you're transitioning from good to really good. Your decisions are getting faster, and your plays are getting cleaner. You're still leveling up, but you can feel yourself getting closer to the top players. Level 6, the Mastermind decks. If you've made it here, congratulations. This is where deck building becomes something close to art. Every card choice, every placement, every spell has a clear reason behind it. You're not just reacting to what happens anymore, you're thinking several moves ahead. Your decks are designed to set up situations and capitalize on them. These decks are built to stay functional even when things look rough. You could be down a tower, but your deck composition gives you multiple paths forward because every card serves more than one purpose. You've figured out that winning isn't about dealing damage first, it's about playing smarter over time. And that's exactly what these decks are designed to do. Mastermind decks are put together with serious thought. There's no random filler here. Every card has a clear job and you know when each one should be played. You're not terrified of bad matchups or off-meta decks anymore because you've learned how to make adjustments. You've faced most situations before, and your deck gives you the tools to adapt. Even when your opponent thinks they've cornered you, your deck structure gives you outs. This level is all about understanding tempo and control. You recognize the rhythm of different deck archetypes. You can tell within the first 30 seconds if your opponent's running cycle or beatdown, and once you identify it, you know how to respond. You're getting better at predicting rotations, baiting out counters, and making your defenses look clean. You're the kind of player who makes difficult plays look easier than they actually are. Your elixir management is really solid now. You're not wasting much. You defend heavy pushes with fewer cards than most players would need and still have enough left for pressure. You've learned when your deck wants to push and when it needs to wait. You've figured out how to turn small opponent mistakes into real damage. The difference between this level and earlier ones is consistency. You've stopped second-guessing your deck choices. Even if a play doesn't work out, you adjust quickly. You don't tilt as easily because you've learned that losing composure is what throws games. Instead, you reset mentally, wait for your next opening, and execute with better timing. That steadiness is what separates players at this stage from the rest. You've also started reading opponents, not just their decks. You can tell when someone's playing nervously by how fast they cycle. You can sense overconfidence and use it against them. You bait overcommitments, then punish hard enough that they play scared for the rest of the match. You're not just winning with mechanics, you're winning by understanding behavior. At this level, your decks reflect a clear identity too. Maybe you're known for patient, defensive builds that never crack, or aggressive chip damage decks that always find openings. Either way, your deck choices say something about how you approach the game. You've developed a style that feels distinctly yours. Even when you lose, it's rarely from confusion. It's usually from calculated risks that didn't pan out. You review your matches and figure out what went wrong. There's less frustration and more problem solving. That's why players at this stage keep leveling up. They don't just play to win, they play to refine their craft. By now, Clash Royale feels less chaotic to you. You see matches in terms of patterns and percentages. You plan ahead, adapt when needed, and stay composed under pressure. Your opponents might panic, you stay methodical. They react blindly, you make informed reads. You're the strategic thinker in a game that can feel random. Level 6 is where strong fundamentals meet smart deck building. It's when you realize the game isn't about luck or having certain cards, it's about how you use what you've got. You've developed patience, awareness, and the ability to stay in control even when matches get messy. Level 7, the legendary decks. This is the final level, the absolute peak of Clash Royale deck building. Level 7 isn't just about power, it's about perfection. At this stage, every card, every cycle, every drop of elixir has been thought through. These aren't decks built for casual climbing, they're built for mastery. These are the decks we regular players see dominating the highest arenas, the ones that make you wonder how someone can play that cleanly. The legendary decks are the ones that define the game. They don't just follow the meta, they shape it. When decks reach this level, they stop being copies of what pros use and start becoming the blueprints everyone else studies. Every card choice feels deliberate, every synergy looks intentional, and every strategy is built on deep understanding of the game's mechanics. You see them in top ladder matches and competitive tournaments, the builds that separate casual play from elite competition. You've probably seen these decks dominate when you're scrolling through replays or watching high-level gameplay. Think about the X-Bow deck that turns defense into an art form. The classic Splashyard that capitalizes on single mistakes. The evolved Royal Giant decks that perfectly balance range, pressure, and patience. Or the Mortar Control decks that win through chip damage and psychological pressure. These decks aren't just strong, they're timeless, because they reward game knowledge and execution over raw card levels or luck. Level 7 decks are built with complete matchup awareness. They know when to apply dual lane pressure, when to defend and cycle, and when to let opponents overcommit. These decks control tempo like they're conducting a match, not just playing it. Even when low on elixir, they have defensive answers because every card can fulfill multiple roles depending on the situation. The card placements in these decks are surgical. A perfectly timed Tornado Pull or a frame-perfect Ice Spirit can swing entire matches. Spells aren't panic dropped, they're held for maximum value. Elixir isn't overspent, it's calculated down to the last point. These decks defend with minimal investment because efficiency is built into their core design. That's what makes this level so impressive when you watch it happen in the highest trophy ranges. These decks don't rely on surprise factor. Everyone knows what they do, but they still win because the structure is that solid. They're built for adaptation, whether it's Minor Control, Splashyard, or even off-meta builds like Graveyard Freeze or X-Bow Cycle. These decks function at the highest level because every card has a clear purpose and multiple use cases. What separates level 7 decks is their composure under pressure. They don't fall apart when things go wrong. They have comeback mechanics, defensive depth, and flexible win conditions. They're designed to drag losing games into overtime and still find paths to victory. These decks reward players who've trained their instincts to make the right micro decisions consistently. This is what you're actually facing when you run into those players sitting at 15,000 trophies. Another defining trait of this level is identity. These decks have personality and legacy. Some are known for impenetrable defense, others are built for relentless aggression that feels like watching a highlight reel. They become signatures in the community, decks that carry weight and history. When you see certain combinations in the top 1000 global leaderboard, you immediately know what kind of gameplay philosophy is behind them. And when these decks lose, it's not because of fundamental flaws, it's matchup variance, execution errors, or calculated risks that didn't pay off. The deck itself remains sound, because it's been tested, refined, and perfected over thousands of matches at the highest competitive level. Level 7 represents the final stage where instinct, patience, and precision all come together in deck design. These builds have evolved from chaotic beginner piles to calm, controlled masterpieces. They stand among the few deck archetypes that truly showcase how deep Clash Royale's strategic layer goes. These are the decks that most of us will only ever face, never fully master, and that's what makes them legendary. This is the top, the legendary decks, the point where functional construction ends and legacy begins.